My name is Steve, and I'm a businessman and an entrepreneur, and I'm also a cyclist. There's no greater feeling than being on an open country road, and I'm at peace. There was a time in my life when I was singularly focused on work, and it defined me morning, noon, and night. There were some things that were missing, and part of it was I was living a very unhealthy lifestyle. I woke up one day and I said, I want to do the hardest thing in the world, and that thing was the Hawaii Ironman. And I did it 7 times, and as is often the case in life, when you achieve something, you reset the bar. And now I want to get on the podium. And I don't know that I'll ever make it, quite frankly. I think the answer to that is no. But is that what I really want? Is it really chasing down those fears and self-doubt and all the other negativity that goes in and pushing through those barriers? Here's what I know. I know I don't have it figured out. But that's all kind of rattling around in the back of my brain.
I love how he said, I know this. I don't always get what I really want. Isn't that true of us at times? It's fascinating. A couple of weeks ago, I got the chance to travel and see my brother in Brazil, and it was incredible. And watching him on the cycle, watching him ride his bike, got me kind of missing running. I used to run a lot, and I had fun at it, and it was incredible. Like, I would go out and literally run for like miles, and I don't know what possessed me, to be honest with you. This year, like one year, I actually set a New Year's resolution to run 1,000 miles, and I came up a little bit short. I ended up in the 600s, which I was like, whoa. This year, my New Year's resolution has nothing to do with the miles I'm running, and it has everything to do with the weight I'm losing. And the good news is, a couple weeks ago, I was at a all-you-can-eat resort, and so I decided that I want to lose the weight I gained that week. And so that's my New Year's resolution. Like, I ate ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, extra chocolate syrup. They knew me and my boys by name, which is probably not wise. Hey, but you only live once, right? YOLO. Anyway, we digress. So I want to ask you a question. What do you want? We teased that out last week, talking about what is it we want. What is it we want? And so I would ask you, what is it that you want? When you think about what it is that you want, I would imagine that for some of us in here, many of us, we want our way. I tend to fall in that category. I want my way. Another thing I want to do is I want to do what I want to do. I don't want anybody else to tell me what to do. I want to do what I want to do. And isn't it true that is ingrained in us? I go to Starbucks a lot. In fact, I frequent the Starbucks at North Tarrant and Presidio. I love that place. They know me, they know my rhythms, and oftentimes they give me my coffee, and I'm so grateful for that. Like, it's just incredible. But you know what's interesting? Is if they don't make my coffee right, they tell me bring it back. And we'll make sure we bend over backwards to help you get what you want. I mean, in all of our society, hospitality is a big deal, but we bend over backwards. We live in a society where we are king. We live in a society that centers around me most of the time. And if I don't get the food just the way I want it, if my steak isn't just pink right away, or it's not the right size of pink, or it's not perfect, I can send it back, and they give me whatever I wanted, typically. Isn't that funny? And we live in a world where I can get what I want to get, I can do what I want to do, and it leans into that. But not only that, but I also know, not only do we want to do what we want to do, and we want to get what we want to get, but we also want it now. Isn't that true? I don't know what you legitimately want, but I would imagine if you put a time frame on it, it would be that you want it ASAP. You want it as soon as possible. You want it now. But isn't it true, and we talked about this last week, that when we get what we want, that ultimately, if we always get our way, isn't it true that we lose our way? If we get our way, if we get the thing that we want now, oftentimes it leads us onto a path that could trip us up. If we get what we want in the moment, then all of a sudden, 4 years, 5 years down the road, you're thinking, wait a second, I didn't want to still be paying for this car. I didn't want to still be leasing this. I still have credit card bills. What was I thinking? And maybe that's not true for you, but oftentimes that's our reality. If we get our way, oftentimes we end up losing our way. Or another way of putting it is, if we always do what we want to do, isn't it true, we end up where we don't want to be. We always do what we want to do. We end up where we don't want to be. And I love the parenting advice that Andy gave us last week. And I don't know if any of you've tried it yet. I'm looking forward to my kids growing up. But basically, he reminded us, he told us that as parents, your mission is to say, you know what, you can do whatever you want. We can't stop you, but we can put you places where they won't allow you to do things. If you want to be a jerk, if you want to disobey, we can put you in prison, and then they'll keep you from doing that. And that scare tactic, you try it and let me know how it goes, and then I'll do it with my 3-year-old and 4-year-old, or my 4. I'll do it when they're old enough and try to scare them to do the right thing. But isn't that true? If we always do what we want to do, we end up where we don't want to be. Some of you, that's your story. Some of you, that's what you're dealing with, and you're wanting 2019 to be a different year. You're wanting 2019 to be a different reality because you saw in 2018, or you've seen in the past, that you did what you wanted to do, and now you've ended up where you really didn't want to be, relationally, financially, spiritually, even, from a church perspective. And then the other thing that we say is, if we get what we want now, we may not get what we really want later. If we get what we want now, we may not get what we really want later. That sometimes when we get what we want now, it undermines our later. It undermines the idea. It undermines what we really want to get. It undermines who we really want to be. And oftentimes it's easy for us to sacrifice what we really, really want for what we want because of experiences, because of commercials, because, I mean, if we're honest, all marketing strategies don't necessarily remind you what you really, really want. They just tell you what you need right now. And it might not even be what you really need, but it's something that they have concocted an incredible 90 seconds. And just wait, the Super Bowl's coming. And you're going to watch those commercials, you're going to think, I need Cheetos, more Cheetos. I need that car. I mean, you watch it, they paint the picture that your life is not complete unless you get this want and you get it right now. But one of the things we talked about last week, and I thought was so valuable, is that lurking in the shadows of what we want is what we value. That lurking in the shadows of what we want is ultimately what we value. So today I want to ask you a question. What is value? What do you value? And for the next few weeks, I want us to tease this picture out, because I know this, value, when it comes to what is valuable, it's ultimately what's important for you. What is valuable is what's important. What's valuable are the things that you want to be said of you. What's valuable is maybe not that you're rich now, but that you're financially setting yourself up to be rich in the future. What's valuable is maybe that you have kids that when they're 20 and 22 and 24, you're good friends with. Maybe what's valuable for you is that you have a job and you have a business. You have the corner office down the road. What is valuable to you? Ultimately, value is what's important. But another way of putting this is we will never get what we really want until we discover what we really value. We'll never get what we really want until we discover, until we do the hard practice, until we do the hard work of stepping back and really evaluating and saying, okay, this is what I really, really want. And it's difficult at times, isn't it? Because what we want and what we value can be opposites. And what we want and what we value can be completely diametrically opposed. But when we begin to talk about it, when we begin to think about this idea of what we value, the thing I love is that this is what Jesus continued to talk about. when you look at the life of Jesus, when you look at who Jesus was, when you look at how Jesus lived and how Jesus taught, Jesus was constantly teaching to the individuals in his circle, and he was teaching them to value things, not necessarily just to live a life, whatever. He was teaching them and prodding them and pushing them to define their values and to figure out what is most valuable, to figure out what is most important, and live in such a way that you live that out. But when it comes to what's valuable, and when it comes to what's natural, isn't it true that choosing valuable is, well, it's unnatural? Choosing valuable is often unnatural. I mean, we all say we want to choose valuable, but it can be difficult. Today I want to look at the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul was an incredible guy. He wrote over half the New Testament. Paul was an individual that if you don't like Christians, if you're here for the first time, I want to say thank you. If you don't like Christians, you would get along with the Apostle Paul. You would get along with Paul because Paul set forth in his life that he wanted to basically eradicate everything that had to do with Jesus. He wanted to basically kill all followers of the way, put them into prison, get rid of them. And then all of a sudden, Paul, on the road to Damascus, as he was going to purify the church, to purify the religion, if you would, he was startled by a bright light. And in the light, he realized that the very individual he was trying to kill was for him. And he did a about face. He did a 180. All of a sudden, he went the opposite direction and began to share with and began to push and went into different communities and went into different places and would tell people about Jesus. And at times they would throw rocks at him, they would stone him, and they would say, hey, would you just be quiet? They would drag him out, left for dead. And he was so crazy, he would actually run back into the city and remind them that, hey, I don't think you understood. I don't think you got what I was saying. I don't think you exactly are jiving with the message I'm giving you, that Jesus really is my Savior. So Paul, if you are one that you hate Christians or you just think Christians are weird, thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of this morning. But you would get along with Paul. In fact, Paul, he gives us probably one of the most awkward verses, which allow us all to have a little bit of peace, that we can all realize that Paul and me, we're not that far apart. Look at what Paul says when he's writing to the church in Rome. He says, I do not understand what I do. Isn't that true? That's my life. So many times, I don't understand what I do. Like, I know what I want to do, but what was that? I want to ask, somebody in here's brave. Could you do me a favor? Could you, put this verse above your coffee table? Just go ahead, make a pretty painting and put it in your living room. I do not understand what I do. Paul is writing to the church at Rome, and he's telling them, guys, listen, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't understand what I'm doing, which gives us hope. And he goes on, and he just adds a whole bunch of more do's. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. Maybe that's just me. But I read this and I think, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And then he continues on and he says, and if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. Basically, Paul is letting the audience know, I was one of the best law keepers in the world. And even in keeping the law, I realized that I was falling short. I knew the law backwards and forward. I was one of the best Pharisees, he would tell people. When it came to zeal, I had more zeal than anybody in the world. When it came to being a valuable Pharisee, I was the best Pharisee. He knew the law, but even he is sitting here saying, you know what, and if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. I agree that what the law says is valuable, but even I can't keep it. And I'm stinking good. And I'm like, I was the best Pharisee around. I was committed to eradicating the followers of Jesus, and yet life changes. And he goes on, he says, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I'm so grateful that Paul reminds us this. Happy 2019, right? It's encouraging, and maybe it's just for me, But it's encouraging to know that in our journey of trying to follow Jesus, in our journey of trying to put life together, in our journey of trying to weave this thing called a relationship with Jesus, that we've got stalwarts of the faith, we've got individuals that went before us, that they struggle with the very same thing that we're struggling with today. He goes on, he says, "For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." The point is this, what Paul's trying to communicate is when we try to figure out what it is we really want, oftentimes what we want gets in the way. Oftentimes the here and now, the experiences, and it might not be an illegal thing. It might just be a lot of illegal thing that gets in the way of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish, and gets into the way of what we really want to be, gets in the way of the parent I want to be, that gets in the way of the employee, of the spouse I want to be. And he's saying, I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Another way of putting this is what we naturally want is often in conflict with what we ultimately want. What we naturally want is often in conflict with what we ultimately want. I mean, if you were to step back and you were to spend about a day or 2 days or 4 days, one of the things I love is there's a question that when I'm talking with different leaders, when I'm talking with individuals, especially when I'm talking with people that are trying to figure out what is the wise thing to do, a great question to ask is, in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? And in order for us to answer that question, we have to know what our future hopes and dreams are. And I love this because what we naturally want in the future is, it gets in the way. I mean, when I begin to think about my future hopes and dreams, this is what I ultimately want. When I begin to think about my future hopes and dreams, I begin to think in the spectrum of me personally, like the physicality, how I treat my body. I was having lunch with a friend, this was about a year ago. And when we were diving into this question, I love how he answered it. He didn't answer it as if, I want to be healthy when I'm 75. He said, I want to be able to go elk hunting with my grandkids. Now talk about putting a story to a future hope and dream. So when he lives his life out, he's thinking, okay, how do I stay fit so that when I'm a granddad, I can go elk hunting with my grandkids? I love that imagery. But for us to know what we ultimately want, we've got to define our future hopes and dreams. Because what we naturally want is often in conflict with what we ultimately want. Got the chance to talk to my brother. I've shared a little bit about him, but he's living in a remote village off the Amazon River. And what was fascinating as we're talking about this is the community he's living in and the communities around him, they ultimately live based upon what they naturally want. There's not necessarily this really good code of ethic. There's not necessarily this great policing system. It's ultimately just based upon what they naturally want. And if we really were to be honest, human naturally, what we naturally want, isn't it cheating? Cutting corners? I mean, what I want ultimately, yes, but you know what? I really want the corner office today, and if I can do whatever I can to cut a corner and maybe let the boss like me a little bit more, lying, racism, I mean, that's prevalent in our culture today. Adultery, this me-first reality that I'm the center of my world. I mean, ultimately, me first, that's Starbucks saying, hey, you know what? Don't worry about it. Like, let me make you a new drink. Let me make you this. Let me do this for you. Bending over backwards, it just feeds our natural. It's me first. And revenge. I know none of y'all seek revenge, but for me, if I'm on the road, I'm going to say this earlier, somebody cuts me off, it's hard for me to take a deep breath. It's hard for me to sit there and think, they were created in God's image, and I'm going to love them because of that. They were created in God's image, and I'm going to love them because of that. They were created in God, right? Like, I'm like, oh, heaven, no, right? Like, I'm going to get on their tail, and I'm going to be like, you shouldn't have cut me off, and I might miss my exit a time or two, or I might miss maybe that's just me. Sorry. Confession time, right? But isn't this human naturally? Isn't this what comes natural in us is cheating and lying and me first, revenge and thinking I'm better than? In fact, Paul, the same guy that wrote to the church at Rome, he wrote another letter to a province of Rome, to the church at Galatia. And he says this: when you follow the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear. And then he begins to unpack them, right? He says they're very clear, which all of us probably right now in our mind, we've got some things that we're thinking about. That, like, if it's very clear, I know what he's about to say, but he just jumps right in the deep end, and he says sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures. I mean, the things of the flesh, the things that come naturally, this is what is very clear. But he didn't stop there, as if that wasn't enough. Because some of us, we look at that and we're like, oh, we got that. Check. But he goes on and he says this: idolatry and sorcery. To which you're like, idolatry, sorcery? Like, I mean, I read Harry Potter, but not a whole lot. But you know what idolatry is? It's ultimately putting things above people. Idolatry is ultimately when we put things above people. You know what sorcery is? Sorcery is ultimately power over people. It's wanting to lord power. It's wanting to let everybody know that you're in control. It's wanting to let everybody know that I've got it, that it's all mine, that I'm going to tell you what to do because, gosh darn it, I know what I'm doing. And I'm going to lord power over you. And he goes on and he says idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy. Can't help but think that one of the things I hate about me the most is that word right there: jealousy. It's ultimately when we celebrate someone else's failure. When I see somebody else breaking down, when I see somebody else hurting, when I see somebody else that has done the wrong thing, when I see somebody else, and in church world, we're, as a pastor, man, you're probably never coming back. You're like, y'all's pastor is weird. But ultimately, it is hard to face that word. Because we live in a social media culture that I want to be the best, I want to be better than, and all we see is the plastic reality of everybody else's lives. We don't see the outtakes, we see the polished picture. And then when we hear that person has struggles, when we hear that person has a fall, when we hear that person lost their job, there's something inside of us that celebrates because, well, I'm just glad they're not as plastic as they were on their Facebook, their Instagram. But there's something inside of us, and I think it's probably one of the most grossest thing about us as humans, is when we secretly celebrate somebody else's failure, which is ultimately jealousy. I mean, I can say I'm not jealous. There's that heart check there. And he goes on and he says outbursts of anger and selfish ambition, that me first. He goes on to talk about division and envy and drunkenness. I have a feeling that in this room that this is something that you probably are a relationship or two away from somebody that has fallen prey to that. You've seen relationships destroyed. You've seen relationships struggle. You've seen the effects of this, and you begin to wrestle with and think about, and I will never do that, or I will never, and then all of a sudden something happens, and we are dragged away. All of a sudden something happens. You're like, oh, what I ultimately want compared to what I want. But it's not just the drunkenness. It's idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness. There is something in all of us when we read that list that we go, oh, like could we cross that one out? And what Paul is saying, and he's trying to encourage, he's trying to push the individuals that are wanting to follow Jesus, that are wanting to find what they value the most, that are wanting to lean into what does it look like to have a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. He's wanting to push the envelope and encourage them that these are the things that we naturally want, and they're going to come in opposition of what you ultimately want. James, who was an individual we talked about last week, and he, looking at this list, I could imagine that he and Paul probably had great conversations. But James put it this way: but each person is tempted when they are, I love that word, dragged away. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own desire and enticed. And then he goes on and he says, then After desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. You've seen the effects of those things that come natural. And oftentimes, those things that come natural, they come prepackaged with a penalty. They come prepackaged with a penalty with which we're trying to say, oh, I can skirt it. I don't have to worry about it. I can cut corners. I'm bigger than this. I'm better than this. But the truth is that there are desires that are wanting to drag you away from what you ultimately want. And those desires, if we allow them to drag us away, ultimately it gives birth to sin, and then sin hurting somebody, hurting the heart of God. Sin ultimately is if I do what's wrong for them, or I do what's wrong for her, if I do something that diminishes the character and the quality that God has in them for me, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. But James caps it off with this. He says, don't be deceived. I want to just let you know, I'm not standing here as Mr. Perfect. I'm not standing here as an individual that says, I have it all together, now do as I say, not as I do. But you know why this is such a big deal to me? Because we live in a culture where deception is rampant. We live in a culture where deception is rampant. Where we feel that we're better than, where we feel that we can cut corners, we can go around. We feel that in our life, in our livelihood, that you know what? It's just for a season. I can weather the storm. And I can't tell you how many times when we try to weather the storm, the deception leads to death. Death of a relationship, death of a job, death of an opportunity. It leads to us thinking we're bigger and better, and all of a sudden it comes to light. And then we're like, oh, no. So let me ask you this. What do you really want? I don't want this, what do you want? What do you really want? When you begin to think about your life, like when you begin to think in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is it that you really want? Because I would imagine, maybe most of us, we would probably think about the things that we've gotten that we wish we wouldn't have gotten. We would think about the once we acted on that all of a sudden it dragged us away. And next thing you know, we're trying to pick up the pieces. We're wishing we still had the job. We're wishing we still had the relationship. We're wishing this would have happened. And ultimately the reason is because we traded what is valuable for what is natural. And it gets in the way. This is why so many times you've probably heard me say, or you've heard Andy say, this is why we say on a regular basis that following Jesus will make your life better, and it will make you better at life. Because when we begin to put these practices in play, when we begin to say, you know what, I'm going to choose what's ultimate over what is natural, when we begin to choose to forsake, to not be deceived, what happens is we begin to live lives that are characterized by joy. When I'm talking to a buddy of mine that's already exhausted his deductible on his insurance, and he can put a joy on his face, a smile on his face, and say, you know what, despite my circumstances, I still believe that God is good. Because when we follow Jesus, it makes our life better. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be good. It doesn't mean you can go buy the lottery ticket and following Jesus is going to get you the right numbers. Like, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. But you know what it is? When we follow Jesus, those things that come easy and natural, they don't have a hold on you. And then you don't have the guilt, the hurt, the frustration that comes with knowing the very thing I want is now my biggest regret. And if I could go back, I want to undo the very thing I got that I thought I wanted. So let me ask you this. What do you really want? And as James put it, I think another question, and something I would encourage you to lean into, and over the next couple days, next week, I would encourage you to answer the question. This isn't something that you have to go home and like share with your spouse. You don't have to go home and share with your parents or share with your kids or your boss. But I would ask you this: what is dragging you away? What is it that is so easily dragging us away? And the third question is this: is how long do I plan to let what I naturally want drag me away from what I ultimately want? How long? Hear me out. I'm not perfect. These are the very things that I wake up every day and I have to build a wall around. I have to build a fort. I have to figure out, how do I ensure that I'm going to live for the ultimate and not the natural. It is a daily grind. It is a daily battle, but I hope you know it is so worth it. Because the guilt is not there. The shame is not there. The joy and the peace, patience, those are there. So what do you really want? How long are you going to let it drag you away? And how long do I plan to let what I naturally want drag me away from what I ultimately want? Hey, I want you to know, I agree with what Andy said last week, that the content that we're talking about, it's one thing to take it in. It's another thing to talk about it. Well, I firmly believe that you can't grow spiritually unless you connect relationally. And because of that, we've made a website available that Suda, just in the next hour, really, northtarrant.org/really want. We'll have the podcast from today. We'll also have the question sheet, so that maybe you and your family, maybe you got a small group at work, or you and your community group, you want to go through and talk about what it is that is not dragging you away, but what is it that keeps us from living the life that God wants us to? If following Jesus makes you better at life, and it makes your life better, then how can we collectively do that? Hey, I want to thank you so much. Next week, we're going to continue the series. We're going to kind of take what Galatians says, and we're going to go with the natural one, and we're going to go with what does it look like to find what we ultimately want. And I'm excited, because I think at the end of the day, next Sunday, what you're going to say is the very thing that what God wants for you might not be that far off from what you ultimately want for yourself. So I'm looking forward to next week. It'll be a great Sunday. But I'd love to pray with you before we leave. God, we love you. And God, if I could be honest, it's hard sometimes to live in a world where I do not do what I want to do. I hate the things I do, and I do the things that I know I hate, and next thing you know, I'm sitting here in a mound of guilt and shame. But God, I'm so grateful for the fact that you love me. And I'm grateful for the fact that when you see me, you don't see me for the brokenness I see in the mirror. You see me as your child, one that you love. And I thank you that that same reality is true of everybody in this room. So God, I just ask that you would encourage us, that you would remind us, Father, of what we really, really want. Over the next week, we would do some heart exercises, and we would really get down to the nitty-gritty and ask ourselves, what's dragging us away? And we'd follow it up with, how long am I going to continue to let it wreak havoc in my life? God, I love you, and I thank you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen, amen. Hey, thank you so much for being here today. If you're a first-time guest, we have a gift for you. It'll be in the gallery. I'll be there. I'd love to shake your hand and say, thank you for being here. Secondly, don't forget, bring your teddy bears. New, kind of used, washed, whatever. Just bring your teddy bears, and let's just overwhelm the Fort Worth Police Department with some awesome teddy bears that are going to help some great kiddos in our community. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you next Sunday.